My name is Lisa Mason, and give me just a second. And I'm so excited to talk to you tonight about insect visitors in your garden. Most are friends, maybe a few foes, and I hope to answer all your questions about insects. Before we dive in, we have a poll, one more poll, which is three questions, and that helps give me an idea of where your comfort level around insects is. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, I'll give you about 30 seconds to answer the questions. All right, can we share those results? Okay. Oh, I'm impressed. 40% of you said that one single ladybug can eat 5,000 aphids. That is correct. One lady beetle or ladybug can eat 5,000 aphids. They are just ferocious aphid eaters and such a welcome garden visitor. All right, our second question on how much gardening experience do you have? Most everybody said they're beginner to they have some gardening experience. So that's great to know. And the most important question, how do you feel about insects? Some 44% said they have their purpose, but I still don't like them. Fair enough, fair enough. Hoping to offer a little more appreciation tonight with tonight's presentation. And then with the 44% also said, with the exception of pests, I welcome them to my garden. And then 11% said, I love insects. They are the bee's knees, and I do everything I can to help them. Okay, well, that helps me know where we're at for tonight's presentation. So, my name is Lisa Mason, and I am the horticulture specialist and entomologist with Colorado State University Extension. I am in the Arapahoe County office. If you're not familiar with CSU Extension, we are essentially the outreach branch of the university. We have an office in nearly every county in Colorado, and we offer a wide variety of programming. I'm housed under horticulture, but with natural resources, youth education, food safety, animal health, water conservation, and more. So if you're not familiar with your local county extension office, be sure to check us out and see what we offer in your community. From a horticulture perspective, you can reach out to your county extension office and ask us anything about your garden, yard, or landscape. We field those inquiries for free. Maybe you have a sick tree. Maybe you want to rip out some turf grass and plant some native plants. Maybe your tomato has a weird disease, or you have a six-legged critter that you would like to know the identification of. Reach out to us. We are here to help. We offer a lot of free webinars, such as this one, in-person classes and trainings. So do check us out. All right, tonight we are going to talk about why we care about insects, beneficial insects, some insects, friends or foe. Maybe it depends on who you ask. I'm going to go with friends. And then we'll talk about a few foes in our garden. So let's start big picture. Why do we care about insects? From a big picture, humans couldn't survive without insects. E.O. Wilson was a famous biologist, and he estimated that humans would disappear from the land after just a few months. That's how much we rely on insects in our ecosystem. They offer us so many benefits. Many of these benefits are almost behind the scenes. We don't even know it's happening, but they're working hard. So they play a vital role in nearly every ecosystem. They're pollinators. Pollinators facilitate plant reproduction. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Some insects are decomposers. They're the ecosystem cleanup crew, which is so important. Predators. A lot of insects prey on other insects. So, for instance, lady beetles feed on aphids, which are a garden pest. Natural enemies against invasive species. This continues to be a huge area of research. Notably, there's a lot of research going on Japanese biocontrols or yeah, Japanese beetle biocontrol in hopes that maybe that could bring down the population a little bit. Insects are food for other organisms, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish, all kinds of wildlife. Did you know that grizzly bears feed on miller moths in Yellowstone National Park? They really provide an integral role for so many other animals, and also humans. Now, I know here in the United States, we get the heebie-jeebies a little bit when we think about eating insects. But insects are a vital, sustainable protein source for many countries around the world. And we also get specific products from insects as well. Honey from honeybees is a great example. It takes one honeybee her entire life to make 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey. So they're really hard workers. We get silk from silk moths and carmine extract. This is one of those things you might not know. Carmine comes from an insect that feeds on prickly pear cactus, and this insect. From when you see it on the cactus, it looks white, but if you smash it, it's this deep red color, and they use that for dye, for fabrics, and even for food and cosmetics. So, if red velvet cake or red lipstick, any of the foods or cosmetics that have that deep red or even a pinkish color to them, a lot of times that comes from the insects on prickly pear cactus. And have you ever thought about the importance of dung beetles? Think about that for a second. Dung beetles recycle dung back into the soil. And we need dung beetles, otherwise the dung is gonna remain on the planet. And so they really provide us with an important ecosystem service. We have over 6,000 species around the world. Dung beetles are estimated to save the cattle industry about $380 million. And that number is probably higher. That came from a study back in 2006. So that number is probably even higher. And without dung beetles and other decomposing insects, we would still have dung from when bison roamed the west. So very important insect here. And just a fun fact, the African dung beetle actually relies on the Milky Way galaxy for navigation. And that came out of a research study that they took dung beetles in the lab and tried different scenarios to figure out how they navigate in their world. And ultimately, the researchers came up with the conclusion that they use the Milky Way to navigate at night. Dung beetles, pretty cool insects. And when we look at all the biodiversity in the world, so all the plants, the animals, bacteria, all the things, right now with the species that are described, about 52% of all that biodiversity is insects. We have just scratched the surface on the number of species that actually exist in our planet. And so, estimates, if we had described every single species on the planet, so still about 44% is just insects. Now, that's pretty impressive. And if you took 25% of that pie chart, of all the biodiversity, 25% of that is beetles alone. Beetles, there's just a huge amount of biodiversity. When we look at number of species, and these are number of species that have been described by scientists and researchers, over 800,000 species of insects have been described. By comparison, plants is about 400,000 to 500,000 species, and vertebrates about 50,000 species. And we don't know how much biodiversity is out there. There's different estimates, but some scientists estimate that only one half to one third of the insects have been described. Pretty impressive. So let's talk about some of these garden friends and some of that biodiversity that you might see in your own garden. Generally, we have three categories of beneficial insects. We have predators. These are insects like ladybugs that actively prey on other insects, keeping those pest populations down. We'll talk more about examples in each of these categories. Parasites. Parasites don't often get enough credit. They will seek out their prey and parasitize it. So for instance, we'll talk more about tachinid flies. They lay their egg on a host insect, and the larva from that egg will consume the host insect. And then we have pollinators. Pollinators are sometimes some of the more popular garden visitors, but they're also important. Pollinators are needed because that's where a lot of our food comes from, and that pollination also helps facilitate plant reproduction. So let's start with predators right off the bat. Let's talk about lady beetles or ladybugs. Here in Colorado, we have over 80 species of ladybugs. And ladybugs go through a full metamorphosis. So this is really important. Look at the pictures on this slide. The top two pictures are immature larvae of a ladybug. So a baby, essentially a baby ladybug. And to me, they look like tiny little dragons. And you'll see them on your plants, and they are voracious aphid eaters. They eat more aphids than the adults. And so I highly recommend if you have aphids in your landscape, wait before you do anything, just wait and watch who is visiting that aphid infestation. I personally had an aphid infestation. I have it every year on my purple leaf sand cherry. And only a few branches are impacted, but just covered in aphids. And I always capture the biodiversity, all the different insects that are eating those aphids, particularly the baby ladybugs. We have so many ladybugs on this plant in all life stages, the eggs, the larva, the pupa, and the adults. And it's so much fun to watch that in action. So highly recommend watching an aphid infestation because truly you will attract so much biodiversity. You can purchase lady beetles at the garden center. It is a native species that occurs in Colorado, but the adult lady beetles they can fly, so they are likely to fly off and find their own food source, less likely to stay in your landscape. So I will bring ladybugs to my niece's birthday party every year, and the kids get to release them, and it's a great educational opportunity. But from a biocontrol perspective, not too effective. Could be fun, but just not too effective. And so, ways to attract more lady beetles to your landscape, those pest insects for sure. And with aphid infestations, you can actually leave the aphids if they're not harming much of the plant. You might see some branches covered in aphids, but overall, in a home garden setting, a lot of the time they aren't really hurting the long-term health of your plant. So I personally leave all the aphids in my landscape, and my plants are still growing strong and helping out with that biodiversity. You can also plant nectar flowers too to attract lady beetles and other insect predators. Lacewings. You've probably seen lacewings. If you have a porch light on at night, I see these adults flying around the porch lights a lot. These beautiful insects have long, lacy-like wings, and they are excellent garden predators. And so again, the adults look very different than the larva. So look at this larva here. It also looks a little bit similar to maybe a lady beetle larva, but it's got these pinchers, and those pinchers are used to take down aphids and tiny caterpillars, keeping pest populations down in your garden. So the eggs are also really interesting to note. Notice how it's a stalk with an egg at the very end of that stalk. Again, when I see aphid infestations, I always see a leaf or two with lacewing eggs. So leave those eggs, and those lacewings will consume those aphids and other pest insects. Now, lacewings are pretty prominent in the garden. You can purchase them at egg and larval stages. Now, if you choose to do that, They might stick around a little bit longer than ladybugs because they can't fly right away. So they may stick around and feed on your aphids for a while. Once they become an adult, they're more likely to disperse, but in the larva stage, they may stick around a little bit longer. Syrphid flies. Now, syrphid flies don't get enough credit because they provide double benefits for us. They are pollinators, but the larvae feed on aphids and other pests. So the larvae are, they don't stand out. They almost look like little worms to me on a leaf. And they're just there. Most people don't notice them, but they are actively hunting pest insects. Now, once they become an adult, syrphid flies are often confused with bees and wasps. And this is because bees and wasps are stinging insects, and so if they can mimic stinging insects, predators will leave them alone. So flies have just amazing mimicry. But pictured here, these are all syrphid flies that you're going to see visiting your flowers. And the larvae, you'll see lots of larvae, especially if you've got aphids. They're actively feeding on those pest insects. Completely harmless to people. They cannot bite, they cannot sting, but very beneficial for our garden ecosystems. There's one study out of Cornell showed that they can reduce an aphid population up to 100%. They can eat all the aphids potentially. So we love our syrphid flies. Mantids. You might see praying mantis in your garden. We have 7 species in Colorado. Five are native, two are introduced species. The European mantid, which is pictured here, that is by far the most common mantid that you're likely to see. Praying mantis are impressive hunters. Now look at these, the first pair of legs, their forelegs. They are modified. They're made for hunting. And so they stalk their prey and they can grasp their prey and they have a really strong grip on that prey. And they can move their head from side to side. Most insects cannot do that. So they're pretty impressive hunters. Now, one thing to note about praying mantis is they're opportunistic. They're going to prey on anything they can find. It may be those pesky grasshoppers, could be a bee or another beneficial insect. They aren't too particular. So in terms of adding them into your landscape as a biocontrol, well, they're mobile. So they're gonna seek out prey on their own. So they probably are not gonna stick around. You buy the little egg cases and it is fun to watch those baby mantids hatch. But they probably are not gonna provide a lot of support in your own garden. Um, in addition, since they are opportunistic, they're going to hunt anything that they can find. Believe it or not, there are actually reports of them hunting hummingbirds. Like they wait on the hummingbird feeder and they can catch a hummingbird. And if you don't believe me, you can look that up online. There are videos online. It's amazing the grasp that they have as they hunt. Now, praying mantis will leave behind an egg case. We call this an ootheca. And this egg case will overwinter. And European mantids, that'll overwinter and the egg case will hatch the following year. Now, if you go to the garden store and you buy praying mantis, an ootheca, an egg case, there it's likely going to be the Chinese mantid, and a lot of times those will not overwinter very well. The European mantid tends to overwinter a little more successfully. So something to keep in mind if you're considering buying praying mantids at the garden center. Tachinid flies. Okay, this is a parasite fly that is very important because it also preys on other insects by parasitizing them. They lay their host. They lay their egg on a host insect, and when the egg hatches, that fly larva will consume that adult insect. A great example of this is Japanese beetles. There's a biocontrol, which is a tachinid fly that only targets the Japanese beetle. And the female tachinid fly does exactly that. It will seek out one adult Japanese beetle. She will lay her egg. the egg hatches, and the fly larvae consume the adult Japanese beetles. So pretty impressive. Now, when people see these flies in the landscape, some species are quite large and have spiny hairs on them, so they might look a little bit alarming at first glance. But these flies cannot bite, they cannot sting. They are here to prey on other pest insects in the landscape. So tachinid flies are very important garden predators. All right, here's a decomposer. Bumble flower beetles. I get questions at the extension office on this every single year. Because the bumble flower beetle is related to Japanese beetle. They are both scarabs. They're both in the scarab family of beetles. So they have a similar body shape, and the larvae look very similar too. But bumble flower beetles are beneficial. Japanese beetles are invasive. So bumble flower beetles will lay their eggs in where there's decomposing matter, compost piles, garden beds, anywhere where there's a lot of decaying matter, and the larvae feed on that decaying matter, breaking it down, recycling it back into the soil. So bumble flower beetles are very beneficial. Uh, Versus Japanese beetles that only lay their larvae in turf grass. So it's a very important distinction. So a lot of times someone's in their compost pile or they're working in their garden bed and they come across all these larvae in their garden bed and assume it's Japanese beetles. But if it's not in turf grass, it is not Japanese beetles. It is more likely bumble flower beetles. So they've got that C-shaped grub shape to them. Once they go through metamorphosis and become an adult beetle, the adult beetles will forage on overripe fruit usually or flowers, pollen and nectar. And you can see with the hairs on the body, they often collect pollen grains and can even help pollinate flowers. So no need to be alarmed if you come across these grubs in your garden bed or compost pile. Occasionally you might come across a very large number of them, and sometimes that's just too much for people. So if you're willing, get those garden gloves on, and you can actually spread them out in your landscape, so they're not all in your garden bed where you're trying to work. But this is a beneficial insect, very common in the landscape. So, to attract these beneficial predators, planting flowers that provide a lot of nectar can really help out those insects. Flowers that are shallow, so they can get their tongues in those flowers. So, examples are most plants in the carrot family. Dill, fennel, moon carrot, which is one of my personal favorites. Yarrow is another great option. Sedums, alyssum, basket of gold, thyme, and there's a lot of other great options out there. So the adults need that nectar for energy, and then the larvae consume the pest insects in our garden. Okay, and our third category of beneficial insects are pollinators. Now, why are pollinators so important? Well, approximately one-third of the world's crops depend on insect pollinators for reproduction. Bees alone pollinate about $15 billion worth of crops each year. That translates to about 80 crops that are dependent on pollinators. That's primarily our fruits, vegetables, and nuts. So the most healthy part of our diet, but pollinators don't stop there. Everything is connected. And so another example of how pollinators are important for human food sources, pollinators pollinate alfalfa and clover, which is used to feed the cattle. So bees specifically pollinate alfalfa and clover, which is used to feed cattle. So our meat and dairy industries are also dependent on bees. And from an ecosystem perspective, about 75% of all the plants in the world are dependent on pollinators for plant reproduction. And it goes beyond just the honeybee. Now, the honeybee is very important economic crop pollinator. But we have other specialist relationships too. And that means the pollinator focuses on specific plants, and the plants rely on that pollinator to reproduce. So, a couple of examples you might see in your own garden are bumblebees. Bumblebees do something called buzz pollination. So, when they land on the plant, it has a special vibration and it actually releases the pollen from that plant. And no other bee can do that. So, plants that need buzz pollination are tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, blueberries, and more. So bumblebees are critical pollinators. Cactus bees. Now, if you've ever observed a cactus flower, I highly recommend it because you will see an amazing amount of biodiversity, an amazing amount of insects visiting those flowers. But there are some bees that rely on cactus flowers to complete their reproduction, and they help pollinate those cactus plants. Squash bees. Squash bees are they're an example of you plant squash and pumpkin plants and the bees will come. They're native bees. They've been here pollinating the native squash plants long before humans came along. And they will pollinate your squash plants. And so this summer, look at the orange flowers, the big orange flowers. You're likely to see bees in there, whether they're resting or actively pollinating. Squash bees are the only pollinators for all of our pumpkin and squash plants. And then there's yucca plants and yucca moths. If you have a yucca in your landscape, they are only pollinated by yucca moths. And the female yucca moths are super savvy. So she will collect pollen and she tucks it under her chin and she deposits just enough pollen so the plant can reproduce while saving the rest for her offspring so that her offspring can complete development. And one cannot survive without the other. So yucca plants completely rely on yucca moths, and the moths rely on the yucca plants. I was lucky. I was hiking recently and I caught the blooming yucca just in time. This is just in early June, and I got to see yucca moths for the first time. They were just hanging out in the flowers, but very, very cool specialist relationship. So, what is pollination? Well, it's facilitating plant reproduction and is very complicated, but for our purposes tonight, that pollinator is visiting the flower for the nectar and pollen reward. She has no idea she's doing the plant any favors, and when she visits that flower, pollen grains are deposited on her body, and then she's going to fly to the next flower, and in that process, pollen grains are deposited on the next flower, and when that happens over and over, that completes plant reproduction. Okay, so let's dive into pollinators a little bit more. The biodiversity we have, even in just Colorado, is pretty incredible. In Colorado, we have over 1,000 species of bees. Worldwide, 20,000, and in North America, we have 4,000 species of bees. And why are bees among the most efficient pollinators? Well, they have specialized hairs on their body. They're branched hairs that it's almost like sticking your hand in a bag of Cheetos. You know how the Cheetos that sticks to your fingers, like almost like Velcro. Well, that's what pollen does when a bee visits a flower. So here's some examples. Look, you can even see the pollen grains on the underside of this bee's abdomen. So they're pretty very very efficient pollinators. Now I want to talk about three character or lifestyles of bees, because that helps us understand how we can protect bees and how we can know where to look for them in our landscape. So let's talk about eusocial bee characteristics. That's our first life cycle, and the primary species of eusocial bee are honeybees. Now, honeybees are a non-native species to North America. We brought them over in the 1600s. And it's important to note that they are a managed and domesticated species. So humans manage honeybees. We breed honeybees. And honeybees face a wide variety of challenges. Very serious challenges too, like varroa mites. Varroa mites are responsible for the loss of so many bee colonies every single year. But the important distinction is to note that honeybees are not going to go extinct because we can replace them. Beekeepers buy new bees, they can split a healthy hive, or they can catch a swarm. And so when beekeepers have to replace their colonies, it's very expensive and it's devastating. But the distinction is honeybees are not going to go extinct. And so when we hear about colony loss rates, this year it was a whopping 62% honeybee hive losses across the country. That's huge and incredibly devastating. That is the replacement rate that beekeepers have to replace their bees. And so we're going to talk about wild bees here in a minute. Both bees, honeybees and wild bees, require different management strategies to protect them, to help them succeed in our landscapes. So we'll talk more about that. Honeybees and other eusocial bees are defined by three characteristics: overlapping generations in the hive, a reproductive division of labor, meaning there is one queen and she's the only one that lays eggs, and cooperative brood care. So when honeybees turn a certain number of days old, they actually become a nurse bee and they will take care of the baby bees, the larvae, before they become an adult bee. So they have social characteristics. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, there are solitary bees, and over 90% of all bees live a solitary life cycle. And so let's talk more about that. We're in June right now. Bees have emerged or will be emerging soon, and those female bees are going to start collecting pollen and nectar. She's going to find a space to build a nest, and she's going to pack that pollen and nectar into a tight ball and deposit one egg on it. We call that bee bread. And then she's going to seal up this nest cell right here, and she'll do it again and again and again throughout the whole season. And that larva, that one egg, has all the pollen and nectar it needs to become an adult bee. So when fall and winter come, her life will come to an end, but all of her offspring, her brood, will be well protected underground and will emerge the following year. Solitary bees nest underground or in pre-existing tunnels. So pictured here are examples of ground nesting bees. Of all the solitary bees, 70% nest underground. And that's why it's so important to understand where our bees are living, because I'm not sure, I think that's kind of an unknown fact that a lot of our bees nest underground. 30% nest in cavities or pre-existing tunnels. So here's some examples. On the far left, we have a human-made bee hotel where cavity nesting bees can build their nest. This is a great way to observe solitary bees without the risk of getting stung. In the middle here, this probably looks like ant holes. You know, you might walk by holes in the ground and assume that they are ants. Not always the case. This is where some solitary bees are nesting. And then furthest on the right is another example of a bee that will nest in hollowed out stems, including in your garden. Plants that have hollow stems are great nesting habitat for those bees. And here's what it looks like inside that bee nest. So we've got the larva on the bee bread, and then on the left here is a pupa because bees go through a full metamorphosis just like a butterfly. Okay, so we talked about social bees and solitary bees. Right in the middle, we have a life cycle that we call primitively eusocial. And that is all of our bumblebees. Bumblebees share characteristics of social bees and solitary bees. So let's talk about their life cycle. Queen bumblebees overwinter. Now, queen bumblebees, in my professional opinion, are the hardiest bees around because they're the only bee that actually hibernates as an adult bee. Take honeybees, for example. They are clustered around the queen, feeding on honey all winter. They beat their wings, and it is over 90 degrees Fahrenheit inside a honeybee hive. Our solitary bees are well protected underground, or in their tunnel. They are protected from all the elements, the snow, the cold temperatures. But our queen bumblebees are out in the elements hibernating. They could be hibernating in a pile of leaves, or maybe a pile of logs, or any other sheltered area that they can find. So very hardy bees. When she emerges in the spring, you'll know it's a queen because of her size. She's nearly an inch long. She's going to find a place to start her new colony. It's usually a hollowed out underground space. Oftentimes, old rodent nests are utilized by bumblebees. So she'll lay eggs that are female worker bees all season. Towards the midsummer time, she will lay eggs that are new males and new queens. The new males and the new queens leave the nest. They will go off and they will find a mate. And then when fall and winter arrives, when the cold temperatures arrive, her colony will come to an end, and the only survivors will be those newly mated queens. And then those new queens will hibernate and the cycle will repeat the following year. So important to note, with bumblebees, we talk about leaving the leaves in the landscape. This is a great example of why leaving leaf debris in the landscape can benefit insects, because it certainly benefits queen bumblebees. Okay, here's your identification quiz for tonight. And I love to do this because I know there's so much fear around stings. And so I want to help you differentiate, is it a bee, a fly, or a wasp? And so take a few seconds here, look at each picture, and think to yourself, am I a bee, a fly, or a wasp? All right, so here's your answer key. The first five pictures are all flies. I know. It's pretty amazing. Flies mimic bees and wasps, so they look very similar. So to the point where bee flies, furthest on the left, have hairs all over their bodies. The second in from the left, look at the yellow markings on the abdomen. That bee is mimicking a solitary bee with hairs on its hind legs. Here, right here is a syrphid fly. We talked about those. Top right, we have a fly that mimics yellow jackets. This is on my sunflower in my front yard. So excited to see this insect. This insect cannot bite or sting. Completely harmless, but looks so similar to a yellow jacket. Bottom left, we have a fly mimicking a bumblebee. Now, the wasp here is visiting milkweed flowers. This is a sand wasp. A sand wasp is a solitary wasp that visits flower for nectar and preys on flies and other insects. Sand wasps are completely harmless. The only way they could sting if you handled them, but they prefer to keep to themselves. They want nothing to do with humans. And then we have a couple of bees too, and these are tricky bees. The second in from the right, this one here, is a European wool carder bee. If you have lamb's ear in your landscape, you probably have wool carder bees. These bees will nest in cavities, so pre-existing tunnels, and you're likely to see them around lamb's ear because the females will scrape the fuzz off of plants, and she lines her nest cells with the plant fuzz. So the males get a little bit territorial about the female bees around patches of lamb's ear. So you're likely to see these bees around lamb's ear. And furthest on the right is actually a cuckoo bee. This is a bee that will parasitize another bee. So she wouldn't sting you, but she's gonna seek out another bee's nest and lay her egg in that nest. So, how do you tell the difference? Well, wasps generally have long, narrow bodies. Bees are going to be a little bit more compact, and flies are a little more compact as well. A long, curly antenna, no pollen, no hairs, and often you'll notice a constriction between the thorax and the abdomen. So it almost looks like someone went and pinched the top of their abdomen. That generally means it's a wasp. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about wasps. So yeah, well, let's come back to wasps. You can easily tell it's a fly based on the giant fly eyes. The eyes almost go all the way to the top of the head. Where bees and wasps, their eyes are more on the sides of their head. Flies also have short, stubby antennae. Bees and wasps have long antennae. Flies only have one pair of wings, but it's really hard to tell that when you see a fly outdoors. Does it have one pair of wings? Does it have two? So the better characteristics to focus on are the giant fly eyes and the short antenna. Also, flies do not carry pollen like bees do, and most flies are not nearly as hairy as bees. You know it's a bee if it has hairs on its body and if it's carrying pollen. Bees carry pollen one of two ways. They will pack pollen and nectar and put it in their pollen baskets. Honeybees and bumblebees have pollen baskets, so you'll see balls of pollen and nectar. And all the other bees have special pollen collecting hairs on their body. Could be their hind legs, could be under their abdomen. All sizes, shapes, and colors, though. So, other things you can look for besides the hairs on their body are the bend in their antenna. Their eyes are usually well separated on the sides of their head as well. So, here's your answer key. Again, am I a bee, a wasp, or a fly? Now, all the insects pictured here, I promise, will not sting you. If you tried to pick up that bee or any of these insects, it might try to sting you, but these are not the ones that create a nuisance in your garden at all. So, and look at each picture. The giant fly eyes, the short antenna. This wasp has a long, narrow body and no hairs, no pollen. And the bee, especially the wool carder bee, you can kind of see the hairs on her body. So here's examples of bees you might see in your own garden. Now look at the diversity. For size perspective, this photo in the top left corner is in a bindweed flower. It is very tiny. It's a little tiny bee. And she has pollen grains on her hind legs right here all the way to our queen bumblebees, which are nearly an inch long. So this one in the bottom center, or we also have our sunflower bees that are also quite large. Look at the pollen on her hind legs. It almost looks like she's wearing leg warmers. Other species will carry pollen in different ways. We even have some bees that are bright metallic green. So quite the diversity. Now, beekeeping. I want to address beekeeping real briefly because one question I get asked a lot is beekeeping the best way to save the bees? I want to help the bees. How do I start beekeeping? And generally the answer is no. Beekeeping is not the way to help the bees because um honeybees are a managed and domesticated species. So if you want to save wild bees, there are different strategies. Now, beekeeping can be a great hobby. It's a very popular hobby. And collecting the wax and the honey is wonderful. Just observing, just having the experience, and learning about how to manage a hive. It's a wonderful thing. But it may not be for everybody. Beekeeping can be very expensive to get started. It can be upwards of $1,000 to get started. A package of bees is anywhere from $150 to $200. Plus, you need the hive, the equipment, the safety gear, and more. So it can be expensive, and it's also a time commitment. Because they're a managed species, you can't just set the hive and leave it. It requires ongoing maintenance. And with beekeeping, they are facing a lot of challenges like varroa mites, extreme weather conditions, and more. So it's something to consider. I've been a beekeeper before. It's a wonderful thing, but it depends on what your own personal goals are. If you want to save or help the wild bees in your own gardens, providing flowers and habitat spaces are the best way to go. There is some research to support that honeybees can actually outcompete native bees. And there's a lot more research that needs to go into that. It's a very nuanced question. But generally, if floral resources are scarce, honeybees can outcompete the wild bees. And so all the more important to plant more flowers. In urban settings, that might not be a thing because there are a lot of floral resources available usually. But if you're managing an area for conservation, if your goals are conservation oriented, it might be best to prioritize saving the native bees instead of having honeybee hives. And in agricultural settings, planting wildflower strips is one of the best things you can do that will benefit your crops and also insect biodiversity. And what happens if you come across a bee swarm? We are in the tail end of swarm season, but it's still possible. Bees will swarm when they outgrow their hive. So they pick up the queen and they feed on a bunch of honey and then they leave the hive. And so during this time, they don't have a hive to protect. So a swarm is actually very docile. I know it can be very alarming, but they are very docile. And it's best to call the bee swarm hotline because there are beekeepers that will come and get those bees. Now, while they're in this swarm state, they're sending out scout bees to find a more permanent home. But again, they're very docile during this time, so no need to panic or be alarmed if you come across a bee swarm. We also have a variety of other pollinators in your gardens. I'm going to run through these real quick. Birds. Hummingbirds are a welcome visitor to our gardens. This female hummingbird has pollen grains on the top of her head. The best thing you can do for hummingbirds is actually plant nectar flowers for adult hummingbirds, but also that attract insects because she cannot raise her babies without feeding her babies insects. So those nectar flowers are so important for hummingbirds. A large percentage of their diet is insects. Wasps. We're going to talk about more about wasps in here in a second, but pollen wasps, see these pointy abdomens in this penstemon flower, are pollinating wasps. They will visit the penstemons and they will pollinate those flowers. Flies, we talked a little bit about how they are predators, and they will also pollinate flowers too. Pictured here is a bee fly. There are some species of bee flies that will parasitize grasshopper eggs. We all know there's too many grasshoppers out there, so bee flies, some species actually help keep grasshopper populations down. Butterflies and moths. We have over 250 species of butterflies and over 1,000 species of moths. Welcome pollinating visitors to our gardens, and each species has a different caterpillar host plant. So by planting the caterpillar food, you can attract the butterflies and moths that you would like in your landscape. Beetles, again, predators and pollinators, and you'll see them feeding on pollen and nectar from plants. And bats. Bats are another, it's not an insect, but important to note that they are critical pollinators. Here in Colorado, they primarily feed on other insects. So butterflies, let's talk a little bit more about them. I mentioned that you got to plant those caterpillar host plants. Pictured here, we have three different butterfly species. Monarchs that feed on milkweed, painted ladies that will feed on hollyhocks and sunflowers that can be great caterpillar host plants for painted ladies. And then these bottom two pictures, I have a two-tailed swallowtail, which is a common, the big yellow butterfly we see, and the caterpillar of a two-tailed swallowtail. Now, two-tailed swallowtails, their population is probably going to go down in the next 10 to 20 years because their primary hosts are ash trees. And with emerald ash borer killing ash trees, and with us treating ash trees with insecticides, these butterflies are not going to be able to host on ash trees anymore. The silver lining is they also host on chokecherry plants. So chokecherries can be a little bit of a nuisance in the garden landscape because they shoot up suckers everywhere, but they are important for birds, pollinators, and the caterpillars of two-tailed swallowtails. Here's an example of the variegated fritillary butterfly that hosts on pansies. And so the pictures here are from a client that did not want these caterpillars eating his pansies. So I collected them and purchased some their own pansies that they could feed on and then release them in the backyard. So if you have unknown caterpillars in your landscapes, call your local county extension office and we'll help you identify what it might be. The white-lined sphinx moth. We have nearly 30 species of sphinx moth or hummingbird moths in our gardens. Only two of those 30 species feed on tomato plants. So the vast majority of sphinx moths are welcome garden visitors. The white-lined sphinx moth is probably the most common, and the caterpillars feed on a wide variety of plants. grape, elm, sand verbena. Here, this is a caterpillar at the Plains Conservation Center in Aurora feeding on sand verbena. So we love our sphinx moths. Tomato and tobacco hornworms do feed on tomato plants, and so they can be a pest. Personally, I don't see them nearly as often as I used to when I was a kid, and that is because of the European paper wasp. The European paper wasp is changing caterpillar populations in our landscape, and so tomato and tobacco hornworms aren't nearly as common as they used to be. Leafcutter bees. You might notice round-shaped circles missing from leaves in your landscape. And not to worry, this is an aesthetic problem only. These are leafcutter bees, and that means you have probably have leafcutter bees nesting in your landscape. She lines her nest with these leaf pieces, so no need to be alarmed by that at all. If you happen to have leaves with notches in them, like this, that could be root weevil damage. They can be a pest, but oftentimes they don't harm the overall plant's health. And so we would be happy to talk more about root weevil damage. Just let us know. Okay, so let's talk about real quick, and I'm being mindful of time. I'm gonna speed up just a hair. Let's talk about how you can attract more insects, beneficial insects to your landscape. Insects need food, shelter, water, and space. And so they need a wide variety of flowers, a diversity of flowers that bloom all season long. So plant flowers that bloom in the early spring and plant flowers that bloom in the late fall. You'll want to avoid double flowers, and double flowers are plants that were intentionally propagated by horticulturalists to be big, bright, and beautiful. In that process, they actually breed out the plant reproductive parts. And so it's a beautiful flower, but it's a sterile plant that does not provide pollen and nectar for insects. So be mindful if you love double flowers, maybe add a little bit of both, single flowers and double flowers. A lot of hollyhocks, roses, dahlias all have single flower and double flower varieties. And native flowers are a fantastic option, especially for a water-wise landscape. Insects we know depend on native plants. There's also a lot of great horticultural varieties out there. Native plants that have been propagated, we call them nativars, so different varieties of native plants. And even some of the non-natives can be great for attracting beneficial insects. Bees specifically need bare soil areas to build their nests. And so having that messy habitat that, a manicured lawn is not going to do anything for bees or any other insects. So that messy perennial garden is just the thing that those insects need. Consider reducing lawn area, adding more drought tolerant perennials. That's perfect for bees and other insects. And offering water sources as well. Shallow dishes, bird baths are all great options. A bee hotel is another great option, and that's the nice way to observe solitary bees in the landscape without the risk of getting stung. So I don't have time to talk about this too much tonight. There are some best practices out there to follow. So for instance, the insect hotel needs a backing to it, and the tubes need to be at least 5 inches long. So there's a great fact sheet that will be included in the one-page handout with more information on bee hotels. If you see bee hotels with the slots in the wood, don't purchase that or cover up those slots because that is a great way to attract European paper wasps. You will not be able to attract butterflies with those slots. Butterflies, if you want to attract butterflies, plant those caterpillar host plants. And butterflies also need sheltering areas. So consider tall trees, shrubs, perennials. Those different layers can go a long way for butterflies and other insects and hummingbirds. If you notice you have wanted caterpillars in your landscape, consider covering them because European paper wasps will prey on those caterpillars. And that can be a great way to separate plants that you don't want fed on and other plants that it's okay if the caterpillars feed on those plants. Trees and shrubs are great for all beneficial insects because they do provide that shelter. And there's a lot of great native shrubs, drought tolerant shrubs out there. With trees, remember, all Colorado trees do need some supplemental water. And grasses, especially our native drought tolerant grasses, are great overwintering places for insects. And there are some butterflies and moths that actually host, the caterpillars will host on those plants. So pictured here is an example of a butterfly that exclusively feed on blue grama, which is the Colorado state grass. Here's some examples of grasses that are great for insects. Particular favorites, I love blue grama. I also love side oats grama and June grass. And by attracting insects, you're actually going to increase habitat for birds. Just our black-capped chickadees, which are real common in our landscape, it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars for chickadees to rear one clutch of babies per year. So birds really rely on our insect population. So the more we can do to attract those insects, the more we can help our birds. If you want to learn more, particularly about bees, I do run a community science program called Native Bee Watch that will also be in the handout. And let me know if you have any questions if you want to learn more about bees in your own gardens. So let's talk about friend or foe. Now, for most of these, I'm inclined to say friends, but let's dive right into it. Stinging insects create a lot of fear, and most stings, over 90% of all insect stings, are from the western yellow jacket. The western yellow jacket does not visit flowers for nectar. So they're not going to visit your pollinator friendly, your drought tolerant perennials. That's important to keep in mind. Most people say, ow, I was stung by a bee, but they were actually stung by a wasp. Now, wasps can sting multiple times. A honeybee can only sting once and it will die after it stings because its barb will stay in your skin, and when the insect flies off, that barb stays in your skin and has to be removed. So the honeybees die. They do not want to sting unless it is a last resort, unless they're really provoked. So usually honeybee stings happen when a bee is stepped on. You're walking barefoot in the grass and there's a honeybee there. Wasps will sting if they feel threatened or if their colony is threatened. Now, we have solitary bees, which we talked about. We also talked about solitary wasps. All solitary insects really do not want to sting at all. That insect really has to be pressed up against your skin to get stung. It's our social insects, the yellow jackets, the paper wasps, that are likely to sting because they have that colony to protect. And so let's talk about yellow jackets. The most common question I get is why? Why do we have yellow jackets in our landscape? And the short answer is they're decomposers. They are part of the ecosystem cleanup crew. And normally they feed on carrion or dead things in the landscape. When you add humans to the mix, they love to scavenge at our picnics, our barbecues, trash cans, and sugary things. And so that's when stings can happen. So the best thing to do if you have a stinging insect around you is just stay calm and move away. When people get scared and they start swatting at insects, swatting at yellow jackets, stings are more likely to happen. If you know yellow jackets are a problem in your landscape, one of the best things you can do is put out early season traps. Put pheromone traps in March or even April to catch those new queens before she starts a new colony. So pictured here is a yellow jacket colony. Usually they're like silver dollar shaped, and you can see the adults. Be very careful because they will sting if their nest is threatened. If that nest is a high sting risk, I recommend calling a professional because it can be dangerous to remove a yellow jacket nest. They're always nesting underground too. Now that's a good key characteristic to differentiate between the European paper wasp. Yellow jackets nest underground. European paper wasps nest above ground in a shed, under a house even. They make those open-faced papery nest cells. Now, European paper wasps do visit flowers. They don't want to sting unless their nest is threatened. So if they're not by their nest, they're usually pretty nice. This is an invasive species. This is not supposed to be here, and they prey on pest caterpillars, but they're also preying on butterfly and moth caterpillars, changing the populations in our gardens. So these nests can be removed through wasp sprays, or knocking them down. Just be very mindful. You want to do it at night and follow all safety recommendations. And I just realized I didn't stop for questions. I'm going to stop for one or two questions. Okay, what types of early season yellow traps do you recommend? Any trap that uses the pheromone. It's the pheromone is called heptyl butyrate, I believe, and that pheromone only attracts yellow jackets. So anything that uses that pheromone is great. If you purchase a trap that uses UV light or sugar water, you are going to attract all the beneficials, bees and everything. So don't use UV light, don't use sugar. The pheromone yellow jacket traps are key. Now they're only going to attract yellow jackets, so they will not attract paper wasps either. Okay, I'm actually going to keep going. Okay, another type of wasp that you may come across are bald-faced hornets and aerial yellow jackets. Both of these species make the iconic funnel-shaped nests, and usually those nests are up high in a tree. And so a lot of times the nests are not noticed until fall when the leaves fall off the trees. And then it's like, oh, there's this huge hornet nest in my tree. But by that point, just like other wasp species and our bumblebees, that current colony comes to an end with the cold temperatures, and that nest is going to disintegrate with moisture. So they really don't bother people. The only time these two species bother people is if someone is climbing your tree. So important to be mindful if you have kids climbing a tree. Oftentimes, arborists will run into these nests and stings can happen. But generally, if they're up high in a tree, they want nothing to do with humans. And these wasps will actually prey on pests in our gardens. And in addition to the social wasps, now remember, yellow jackets are responsible for 90% of all insect stings. We have hundreds and hundreds of species of solitary wasps. These wasps prey on spiders, crickets, caterpillars, and they just do their own thing in the background. Most of the time, we don't even notice. These wasps either cannot sting or do not want to sting. So they try to they leave humans alone. They're not the ones that are flying around your picnic, but very beneficial in our landscape. And pictured here, this bottom center one, that's called an ovipositor. That is used to lay eggs in the bark of trees. They don't harm the trees either. They just lay their eggs under the bark, usually of dead and dying trees. That cannot sting you. She couldn't sting you if she tried. So solitary wasps are so important to our garden ecosystems. And if you do have a bee hotel, you might notice some solitary wasps in your bee hotel. And that's excellent because they're not going to sting you. And it can be an interesting way to observe solitary wasps without the risk of getting stung. And so, pictured here, this wasp is a grass carrying wasp. Bringing grass blades to the nest, and she's gonna bring crickets into her nest to feed her offspring. The northern giant hornet, formerly known as the Asian giant hornet, has been eradicated from Washington. So this is no longer an issue in the United States. Even when it was in Washington, I promise the northern giant hornet will not make its way to Colorado. We do not have the climate that supports these insects. And for now, it is completely eradicated from the United States. During this time, when it was during the pandemic, when everyone was in their gardens a little bit more, this wasp got confused with a lot of native Colorado wasps that can't sting. This is a great example, the pigeon tremix. The pigeon tremix is a larger, non-stinging wasp. This is an ovipositor used to lay her eggs under the bark of trees. So these can be alarming when you see them, but I promise they cannot hurt you. Cicadas. Cicadas, I know, might be a nuisance because they make a loud buzzing noise. But cicadas are food for a variety of other insects. They have a pretty fascinating life cycle too. The eastern part of the country, some species will live underground for 13 or 17 years before emerging. Here in Colorado, we have 29 species. Our average life cycle is 3 to 5 years for our cicadas. And they will emerge every year. Different generations will emerge each year. They are often heard but not seen, but very important for the ecosystem. Aphids. Here, pictured here are aphids on the milkweed in my front yard. It looks alarming, but they don't actually harm the milkweed very much, and attract a wide variety of beneficial predators. If aphids are still a nuisance, the best thing you can do, just get a jet of from your hose, a strong jet of water, and hose down the plant. That will kill a lot of the soft-bodied insects, or knock them down so they can't crawl back up. So aphids, I tend to think, are beneficial because they feed our beneficial predators. In some instances, aphids can damage the overall plant of the health. So that's something you have to decide. And your local extension office can help you make that decision as well. Couple other nuisance species. Box elder bugs. Box elder bugs are harmless to humans, but they can be, there's a lot in large numbers if you have a female box elder tree around. The best thing to prevent insects from entering your home is seal up those nooks and crannies, repair the screens. Add weather stripping. Use caulking to seal any entry points to keep them out. If you know they're not causing a problem, there's no need to do anything about them. Long-term control, if they are a huge issue, is removing that box elder tree. And then we have the western conifer seed bug. This insect looks alarming and it makes a little sound when it flies, so it can be maybe a little bit alarming to people, but I promise this insect is harmless too. It feeds on the seeds of conifer trees. So they don't harm the trees or anything, but they overwinter as adults. So they like to go into people's homes so they have a warm place to stay. This is a solitary insect, so you can just move it outside, or vacuum it up. You won't see these in large numbers, and sealing your home will be the best way to prevent them. Spiders. Spiders get a bad reputation, but they actually are very beneficial in our landscape. Spiders prey on a lot of pest insects. You can differentiate them from insects because they do have 8 legs, where insects only have 6 legs. Spiders will hunt their prey using silk or venom. Others will actively ambush and capture their prey. They use venom to immobilize their prey, and outstanding hunters. Spider identification can be very difficult, but reach out to your extension office if you are concerned about a spider that you find in your garden or your home. Um, Spiders are so important at feeding on pests. There's one study from 2017 that they estimated to feed on 400 to 800 million tons of prey annually. So even those spiders in your home, they can survive in your home because they're feeding on other pest insects. Are they dangerous? Well, spiders can bite, but spiders don't actively seek out humans to bite. They would prefer to keep to themselves. The only venomous spider that we have in Colorado is the black widow, which can be common in Colorado. But again, their bites from black widows are very rare. You of course would want to seek medical attention right away if you were bit by a black widow and save that spider, put it in a jar. But that is the only venomous spider. The other one that gets misidentified all the time in Colorado is the brown recluse spider. Now, brown recluse spiders There have been less than a handful of instances where scientists have confirmed that that spider is a brown recluse spider. Their natural native habitat is actually the eastern part of the United States. So if a brown recluse spider is found in Colorado, it was probably hitched a ride in a car or in luggage or something. They do not naturally occur here. So they are a venomous spider, but they do not occur in Colorado. So, and all the other spiders, if that spider's pressed up against your skin, it can bite, but it is not venomous to humans. Different people will have different reactions to spider bites. So, if you were bit by a spider, seek out medical attention. But note that the black widow is the only venomous spider found in Colorado to humans. And there's a lot of false information on social media, everywhere on the internet. This is an example of a social media post about how this spider is a new spider that's killing people, and that is completely false information. The pictures here are the woodlouse spider that's probably found in every house. They keep to themselves. They feed on roly-polies or pill bugs. The woodlouse spider can bite, but it is not venomous. It is not deadly. This is a very common spider in Colorado. Speaking of woodlouse spiders, I think I just covered that, but they feed on roly-polies, and oftentimes they will hunt at night. And it's not a native species, but it is well established here in Colorado. Funnel weaver spiders are one of the most common spiders you'll find in your home. Often, this is one of the species that is misinterpreted as the brown recluse, but it is not. And if you can snap a picture of it, we can help you identify it. Jumping spiders. Jumping spiders move quickly, so they can cause alarm, but these are excellent hunters of pest insects. And due to time, I'm going through this information kind of quickly, but we can share slides and the handout will have more information. Wolf spiders are another common spider that can get kind of large. Wolf spiders will carry their babies on their back. They're one of the only families of spiders that show maternal care to their offspring. And cat face spiders. Cat face spiders make very intricate webs. Look for the females in the fall. They have large abdomens because they're getting ready to lay eggs. Spiders, the best thing you can do is seal up entryway points to your home. You can catch and release them. You can kill them. No, they are beneficial. And if you want to keep them from your home, the best thing is to seal up your home. Okay, let's talk about a few other pests. Earwigs. Earwigs are a nuisance. They can reproduce in large numbers, but they actually feed on decaying matter. So most people see damage on their plants and they see earwigs, and the plant damage often is from other insects. But if earwigs are a nuisance, there are ways to control them. You can actually do layers of cardboard with wheat germ and capture a lot of those earwigs and then dispose of them. That can be a great thing to do in your garden ecosystem. But no, they're pretty harmless. They can pinch, but they don't want to pinch humans. Those pinchers are used to defend themselves against other earwigs. And so a lot of misinformation around earwigs. They do feed on decaying matter, so they can offer some benefit to the gardens, but could be a nuisance as well. And grasshoppers. Grasshoppers feed a lot of organisms like birds and other wildlife, but they can feed on your plants. So, some of the best things a home gardener can do, put netting over your plants. Handpick the grasshoppers in the morning or in the evenings. There are some pesticide options available too, and the extension office has more information on that, as well as the one-page fact sheet. If you choose to use pesticides, apply those pesticides in May each year because you want to target those nymphs, the young grasshoppers, before they become adults. If you live in a rural area in Colorado, it is best to work together as a community for grasshopper control because working as a community will be more effective than just working on your individual property. Grasshoppers If you have a lot of weedy species, they're probably going to feed on those plants first, but they can feed a lot on a lot of our wanted plants in our landscape. All right, so for the last about 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about garden foes. And I'm going to talk about flea beetles first before we talk about invasives. Flea beetles leave little holes in your vegetable gardens. So it almost looks like a little shot hole appearance. If they're most likely to cause damage on new seedlings, on established plants, the plant can usually handle some damage. Usually like 20 to 30% of the leaf needs to be destroyed before it impacts the yield of your vegetable. But couple things you can do are plant more seedlings that are needed and then thin out the weaker plants. The flea beetles will feed on those younger plants and then you can pull them out later. This can be another example of when to use floating row covers or screens to protect those plants. And there are insecticide options available as well. Squash bugs. Squash bugs lay their eggs in mulch and in the soil. So when you're cleaning out your garden, if you have squash bug problems, removing a lot of that debris can go a long way in the fall and winter. Hand picking, unfortunately, is also another great option. And looking for those eggs, and the eggs are pictured here, and destroying those eggs can also go a long way. There are insecticide options available for this too. If you use insecticides, make sure that you concentrate the insecticides at the base of the plant. All right, and for Japanese beetles and emerald ash borer are the two of the perhaps most invasive insects causing problems in Colorado right now. Japanese beetles, they have two damaging life cycles or life stages. The grubs infest turf grass and the adults feed on plants in the landscape. And so it is well established in Colorado. It's not going anywhere. So if you do have Japanese beetles, and you'll want to make sure it has those white tufts around the abdomen. There's a lot of lookalikes out there. One of the best things you can do is actually hand pick those beetles off of your plants. Um, Beetles do aggregation feeding, which means when one beetle starts feeding, it's going to attract more beetles. So hand picking those beetles can actually protect your individual plants. And due to time, I'm going to skip some of the slides here, like the life cycle. I promise that's not what Japanese beetle grubs look like. We're going to skip ahead just a little bit. Um, if you think you have Japanese beetles in your lawn, it's important to check for grubs. You can actually do a tug test and look for those grubs in the turf grass. The grub damage mimics drought stress in a lawn, and the damage also mimics a variety of other things that can happen with your lawn. So that's why, making sure you actually do have grubs in the landscape is important before applying products, because if it's something else, we want to know that and want to be able to treat that. Most of the time, homeowners do not have grubs in their home lawns. They're reproducing in the golf course, in the park that is consistently moist turf grass. Homeowners don't keep their lawns wet enough, usually to attract grubs. Now, the adults will still feed in your landscape, but they may not be laying eggs in your turf grass. One of the easiest things you can do is actually dry out your lawn in between waterings. That will ensure those grubs are, the females are not going to lay their eggs in your grass because they need consistently moist turf grass. Other things you can do, we don't recommend the use of traps. Traps will actually attract more beetles to the landscape. And while it's satisfying to kill hundreds of beetles in that trap, you're actually probably attracting more beetles to your landscape. And they're going to find plants along the way to feed on as well. So if you or your neighbor is insistent on using traps, consider putting them at least 30 feet away from protected plants. That will help a lot. And consider other plants to add to your landscape that are resistant to Japanese beetle. So if you're looking for a new rose bush or looking to add some native drought tolerant perennials, there are many options out there that are beetle resistant. We have lists actually at the extension office. So let us know if we can help you with plant selection there. And the last, I'm going to skip some slides here just because we are running out of time. There are some pesticides that are available for Japanese beetles. Just make sure to read the label and be mindful of the pollinators and other beneficial insects in your landscape. Beetle Gone or Beetle Juice, that is a pollinator safe product. It may, if it's feasible for you to apply this product, it is very safe for those beneficial insects. You're gonna have to reapply it every few days, but it can help with Japanese beetles. Okay, the last pest that I want to touch on is emerald ash borer. This is an invasive species that is killing all of our ash trees, and it is slowly working its way through Colorado. It is not found in the Denver area yet, but it's found almost all the way around the Denver area. Most recently, Littleton and Centennial have found emerald ash borer. We just confirmed that it is in Aurora as well, in one place in Aurora near the 4 square mile area. So this invasive beetle will kill every ash tree unless it is treated with insecticide. And so what does that mean? I'm going to skip a couple slides here due to time. This is the map of where it is spread. So notice how it's not in Denver, it is in Littleton, Centennial, and now Aurora. Okay, I want to get to if you have emerald ash borer, you might see D-shaped exit holes in the tree, and you're slowly going to see the canopy thin out and decline over time. So if you have ash trees in your landscape, it's important to make a plan because it will be a financial decision whether you choose to keep the tree or remove the tree. The insecticides are very effective, and I want to highlight one specific product that can last up to 3 years. Um, there's product number one on this slide, emamectin benzoate. It's applied through trunk injections, and it's very effective. Goes throughout the entire tree, and can last up to 3 years. It's labeled for 2 years, but you can get 3 years from control. We know that from a lot of research has been done on these products. Any of the other three products listed here are also effective. I do want to mention imidacloprid is now a limited use insecticide in Colorado per new legislation. So you can only purchase it from a licensed pesticide dealer now. If you choose to use imidacloprid, you will want to make sure to clear out all the mulch, leaf debris, everything, because that product binds to organic matter. And you want to make sure there's enough product to go that actually goes into the tree. You would also not want to apply it if you have flowers or plants directly underneath your ash tree. With all insecticides for EAB, you want to keep your soil moist so the product will be more effective. And supplemental water is always good for your trees too. Now, if you choose to replace your tree, there are a lot of great other alternatives. If your ash tree is not very healthy, it's probably not a good candidate for treatment. That's a big decision, and there's pros and cons to both, but there are great alternatives to planting a tree. So I have about 5 minutes left, and I know there's a lot of questions, so I'm gonna stop there. Thanks for bearing with me there at the end. But let's look at the questions. Okay. Why have we been getting grasshopper infestations? Excellent question. Um, Grasshopper populations will ebb and flow depending on weather. And when we have cool, rainy, wet weather for a prolonged period of time, that actually reduces the number of grasshoppers and promotes some grasshopper diseases. And so we see ebbs and flows in their populations. We have had a series of long, warmer weather, and that's perfect for grasshoppers to thrive. So that so changing climate is one of the big reasons. Grasshoppers are also around for a longer time period during the season. They're emerging a little bit earlier, and they're living a little bit longer at the end of the season too. So we're seeing more feeding, and so a changing climate is another factor, as well as local weather conditions too. So we've just had very favorable weather to promote grasshoppers. We could, next year, if we have a really rough winter, and we have a cool, rainy start to the spring, numbers could, their populations could be reduced. But for now, we're probably looking at grasshoppers as a long-term challenge for sure. Okay, Elizabeth asks, I have tiny white bugs. What are they? I would recommend, for any insect that you don't know what it is, take pictures and take pictures of the plant, take pictures of the damage, and take pictures of the insect. And email me or email your local county extension office. There's so many white insects out there, I couldn't tell ya what it is. But knowing the plant identification and having those pictures, we can help you figure it out, and hopefully give you a solution. Oh, can you repeat the bee hotline? Let's see. If we have time to Google that at the very end, we can. I don't want to, that was so many slides ago. That'll take a little bit of time. So stay on and I'll get that at the very end. Will ivermectin bother wasps or other insects? And so I believe that's an emamectin benzoate product that is used to treat ash trees for emerald ash borer. It's generally no. It will not bother other beneficial insects. There will be some there. It will bother most insects, I should say. Two-tailed swallowtail caterpillars, if it feeds on an ash tree that has been treated with that product or any insecticide, will not be able to survive. But generally, it's not going to bother most beneficial insects. Ash pollen is ash trees bloom at the very beginning of the season, and usually we recommend treating ash trees on May or June, and the ash tree has already finished blooming by then. In addition, specifically for honeybees do not collect a lot of ash pollen. There was a study out of CSU, and they're more likely to visit early season maple trees and other pollen sources. So ash is actually a minimal pollen source for those honeybees. If you have other questions about specific insects, let me know. Okay, I was just talking to my neighbor the other night, and it was really alarming because there were no insects buzzing around the outdoor lights. I remember a time when we had all kinds of bugs, moths, lacewings flying around. It seems so quiet now. Nicole, you're exactly right. A lot of our insects, we're losing biodiversity, but we're also losing the sheer number of insects. And so that's why promoting habitat is so important. Um, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, even we had so many more insects in our landscape. Researchers have documented the windshield phenomenon, which is, 30 years ago when you went on a road trip, your car would be covered in insect debris. And now, sure, you might have some insect debris, but the biomass is just not there. The silver lining with insect conservation, though, is that we can all be a part of the solution, and those small habitat spaces go a long way to help our insect populations. Okay, what is the insect larva that skeletonizes grape leaves, and how do I keep them away? I don't know the answer to that without a picture. Adult Japanese beetles will skeletonize grape leaves. But if you have a specific larva, I would need a picture of that to be able to determine what might be causing problems. So again, take a picture of the damage of the larva and send me an email or reach out to your county extension office.